This is me, an unapologetically loud, empowered, disabled woman, and this is my family. These are the women who raised me and who empowered me, who taught me to be independent. I spent my childhood growing up learning what community women could hold for one another. And this is my man, a half Mexican, half white man who's bilingual and white passing, whose Mexican culture has influenced me and helped me grow into the woman that I am today. We spend our summers traveling around Central America, and this is where I feel as I am my truest self, completely immersed in the differences of another culture and surrounded by something that's totally uncomfortable yet comforting in the oldest and truest way. Travel is the purest form of rebellion. I grew up close to my Midwestern roots, being taught how to be a young lady and going to church here in Garden Grove. My grandmother and her siblings, who we lovingly call the Golden Girls, grew up to be exactly what they were raised to be: wives, mothers, Republicans, and Christians. And my mama followed suit in her undying, unwavering faith in God. I, however, grew up to be a loud, unapologetic advocate and a first generation liberal who had to quickly learn to deal with conflict resolution so that I didn't lose my family that I loved. But I constantly felt like the roots that I had from who I was raised to be and the roots that I grew myself or who I wanted to be constantly conflicted with one another so that only one half of me was flourishing at any given time. It wasn't until I learned how to code switch that I learned how to honor all of who I was. And that was a struggle. I hope that my struggle with this can help my students because I can model for them, I can empower them, I can validate their struggles, and maybe give them advice and lessons on how I handled it. Because I acknowledge that who they are at home, who they are at school, who they are with their friends, and who they want to be are all different people. But those are all important and honored people. But my greatest cultural aspect of myself is my disability. I was diagnosed with ADHD as a child, which meant my mind was going a million different directions at a million miles an hour. I learned depression in the second grade when the teacher sent me to detention constantly, and that's where I learned the public school system wasn't meant for people like me. I had many socially awkward experiences because my mind didn't think in the same way that other people's minds did. But what I was never taught and never told was what I learned, and that's that my disability, it's my greatest asset. I love having ADHD and I would never give it up. I want to teach my students that their differences, their exceptionality, their struggles, those are their assets. I want to frame my curriculum that way so that I can validate my students and empower them. I also know that accommodations look different for every student. For me, it was my service dog, Brady. I got in my senior year of high school, and he walked across the stage with me my senior year of college, where I went to Chapman University, and I was a socioeconomically disadvantaged student in a sea of affluency. Socioeconomic status is one trait that covers and goes across all cultural backgrounds, regardless of race or ethnicity. And it's very common for students in Southern California to be of a socioeconomically disadvantaged status. And I hope that this will allow me to relate to students that I might not have other cultural identities with, and will allow them to connect with me. I became an integrated educational studies major, and my life was changed the moment I watched a movie called Precious Knowledge about the Raza Studies classes in Tucson Unified and the students' fight to keep their program against the overarching bureaucracy of oppression from the Arizona state legislation. In this, I learned what it was to be an empowered and validated student. You see, I've never met a kid who had a dysfunctional relationship to learning, but I've met a lot of kids who have a dysfunctional relationship to school. I was one of them. And this movie showed me what it was like to have your culture validated and what it was to be empowered by your schooling.
I fell in love with the classes because we learned so much.
In every other class, you're just thinking about, oh, let's get this work done. By the book, by the book, by the book, by the book. But in this class, there's meaning to that work.
Let's get to work. Roll up your sleeves, and it's time to work.
They expect more from you. They challenge us more. They challenge me more.
I've never pulled an all-nighter for any other class.
Because now I'm writing about something that I actually care about. I get to choose the subject I want to write about.
Who should have a say?
We should!
You should have a say, absolutely. Say it loud, exactly.
Extremely empowerment that came with ethnic studies inspired me to do all of my research in ethnic studies. And I also found my place in the world of theory by becoming a Freudian scholar. Critical pedagogies, which principles align with that of culturally responsive pedagogy, I see are the only true way to empower, validate, and emancipate our students from the world of schooling. I understand oppression in schools through my own stories and lived experiences. My hopes is that through creating a critical relationship with my students, I can help find a way to liberate them by teaching them that there was someone who came before them that was.
The quickest way to silence a mouth is to treat it as if none had come before.
There are thousands of unreported lynchings that happen in American classrooms each year. The victims are between the ages of 5 and 19. They are black and brown and gay and poor and different and other and not enough and too much. Round pegs in square classrooms. Children suffering for not being who we want them to be, for having voices too loud,
accents too thick,
pockets too thin for classrooms to honor us just as we are.
I need to stand in solidarity with them, and I must have cultural competence. My culture may be very different from my students, but my empathy is something that can surpass that. So I can take what I've learned and find a way to relate that to what they are going through. My love of travel and my thirst for new knowledge and experience, I hope, will lay ground road for my students to open up and share their culture with me, because they will see me as someone who not only invites difference, but admires it. I hope that each time I validate one of my students, that I can empower them, and that every time I empower them, it lets another part of themselves through, so that I can help them find their voice and free them to use it in and out of my space. And very simply, I plan to be genuine and ask with the intention of listening, to listen to what my students want to think, what they want to know, who they are, and what they want to be. I acknowledge that one of the greatest truths in the world is that in learning you will teach, and in teaching you will learn. Part of remaining genuine is to check my bias, and I do this by first admitting that I have one and then constantly pushing back on myself. But I want to encourage my students to also push back on their bias and mine, to call question to it, to engage with dialogue that might be difficult, but to do it with respect. I hope that this will teach them how to interact with people after they leave my classroom. But most importantly, I learned through my own education that history is the beautiful network of roots that allows us to be grounded in the world in which we exist. And with this grounding, we can understand context and develop a critical consciousness. And with this consciousness, we can transform the world we live in. Because of this, I am a reconstructionist. I believe that to generate facts is not a useful tool. I believe that the world needs to evolve and that the youth, the next generations, the descendants, they will be the ones to transform the world. But only if we can educate the whole child and give them the tools they need to succeed in a greater democratic society. Only if we can provide a multi-dimensional education can they be prepared for the world. Only if they know what has come before them will they know where they stand. Only through critical reflection will they know where to go. Educators should be critical, comprehensive, and culturally responsive in their pedagogy, and foster a safe, empowering communal learning environment so that students will have a voice and be validated, so they have the ability and confidence to use their voice to take action and transform their world. It is imperative that students are taught a social studies curriculum that is tailored to their needs and desires for knowledge. It is critical that as educators, we believe that students have a desire and ability to learn and succeed, and that we as educators have the ability to help them as long as we learn to listen and learn how to be emancipatory.